I'm joined now by three MPs from the different parties. Adam Vaughan is a Toronto MP and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. Dan Albas is a Conservative member for the BC riding of Okanagan Centre, Central Okanagan, Similkeen, Nicola, and Murray Rankin is the NDP House Leader and the MP for Victoria. All three of you, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Okay, Adam Vaughan, we have to start with, obviously, the news that the Prime Minister has decided not to go forward on this promise of electoral reform. Let's simplify it for our viewers. If the Parliamentary Committee in December made a clear recommendation, asked the government to hold a referendum, they asked the referendum contain that you ask people if you prefer the existing first-past-the-post system, or they asked the government to submit some sort of proportional representation to the population. Why couldn't the government not have moved forward on that?
Well, there are a number of things. And first, I'd like to acknowledge that, yes, we are, we made a commitment in the campaign, and we have, in a very accountable way, said, unfortunately, we cannot pursue that at this time. The way forward is far too complicated, and there are other priorities which we have to sustain legislative pathways for, and also achieve on in order to make sure that Canadians are well served by this Parliament. And unfortunately, that means we had to set some priorities, and electoral reform wasn't one of them. One of the challenges is that while the committee made some very defined recommendations, the way forward is not at all clear. Creating a referendum process requires a massive overhaul of our referendum legislation and puts, I think, a question in front of Canadians that will be time-consuming, that doesn't have any clear pathway in terms of what constitutes a majority, who gets to fund it, what the question is. It becomes more and more complicated, and when we're setting priorities, that complication led us to the decision we made. But I guess
the question though is, but you just said electoral reform is not a priority for us. I mean, a lot of people will be pulling their hair out and setting their hair on fire when they hear that.
The commitment we made in the campaign was to immediately start work on this, and within 18 months try to bring it to a resolution. And we admit we did not do that, and acknowledge that. And so we made a very clear commitment, and we've made a very clear acknowledgement that we will not be pursuing that policy. But the other challenge that we had was that while there was a suggestion of what type of change might be possible, the two parties didn't agree on what that should look like, and all three parties didn't agree on what that should look like. And so we again had complicated situations in front of us, and we had to set priorities. And from my perspective, housing, dealing with making sure we lift Indigenous Aboriginal communities up and get them the funding they require, the fentanyl crisis. There are serious priorities that we have to deal with, volatility in the world that we have to be able to be nimble and respond to. And so we made a decision. And I appreciate it disappoints people.
You betrayed people.
Right.
You promised something and you broke your promise.
Right,
what else
let's
is
get
there?
to Dan Albas.
People voted for you because of this, and you say, no, we changed our mind.
Rankin, I want to go down in the order. We're going to move because we do have time constraints. Dan Albas, I want to hear from you, and then we'll hear from you, Murray Rankin. Dan Albas, what do you make of this?
Well, let's put it what it was. They were in the third party. They made a half-hearted commitment, and then 7 months later, they started a committee that didn't set off on the right foot and continued to not hear the answer that they wanted. They wanted to hear a preferential ballot versus proportional representation. People in my area are upset and disappointed in them, either for spending money and spending taxpayers' dollars, setting a committee process up across the country, and then not following through, or that it was never their intention to follow through on. So I can see why Murray's upset. Many people thought that they would be a different government, but my leader has said that we want to move on to other issues. Canadians want to hear more from the government on economic growth, which they haven't seen much of, and they want us to focus on jobs and what's happening down south.
Okay. So, to Murray Rankin on this issue, because we're going to get to what's happening down south in a bit.
Hundreds of times the Prime Minister said in the campaign, 2015, the last election that'll be fought first past the post. I know lots of people voted for the Liberals because of that, and now they feel utterly betrayed. How many other promises of that caliber, of that sincerity, is the Prime Minister going to break over the next while? This is important, and I cannot believe they can find glib ways to get around the fact that they misled Canadians in the most cynical way only to get elected. That's what I'm hearing from hundreds of constituents of mine. It is really quite disturbing what they've done. I hope people don't forget.
Okay, Adam Vaughan, a lot of people resisted the temptation to think that the jury, that this was a done deal. When the Prime Minister spoke with Le Devoir in October, and he said that he didn't feel that there was a lot of appetite for electoral reform after the election of a good Liberal government, he basically said to Le Devoir that he didn't really think there was as much of an appetite for electoral reform. A lot of people said, no, okay, maybe he misspoke. But then a lot of other people said, no, that means the fix is in, as early as last October, that this was not going to come to be. What do you say to people who draw that conclusion?
Well, I mean, look, the decision wasn't made until it was made to I admit, and I understand the disappointment, to change course on this particular issue. I think that we need, in a democracy, to allow politicians to be held accountable, and I appreciate the strength of some people's views on this, to be held accountable when they say, look, we promised something, we don't think we can accomplish it, we have other priorities, and some of them have been alluded to by my member from the Conservatives here. We have to set new priorities based on changing circumstances and, quite frankly, three political parties that have we all have specific things that we want to accomplish around democratic reform.
They broke their promise. What else do we need to know, Adam?
I'm not disagreeing with you, but
betrayal. And what other promises will they break? This is a big deal, Adam. This is a big deal.
Okay, I guess I would get back to my.
Not dismissing it in the slightest. But there are other big deals in front of us.
Yes, there are.
Okay, I guess.
So when the Prime Minister says something,
let me just rewind the tape, though. I mean, I'll get back to my original question, though. You say there's not a consensus. You say there was too much work to do. You say there was too much heavy lifting.
I didn't say that. I said we have other priorities.
You said no, but you said among the parties there wasn't a consensus on the way forward.
Nonsense.
Well, we have the committee report.
Nonsense.
The committee report said that why don't you put the question to you? They agreed on a referendum. They agreed on two choices. One of the choices was a first past the post. The other choice was some form of proportional representation. You had a formula by which you could do the fine-tuning and put that type of proportional representation to Canadians. But when you say that there was too much work to do, a lot of people beg to differ and say, well, no, you had it given to you on a platter.
Look, when we bring forward a legislative agenda, we have to get it through the House of Commons and through the opposition. It's why closure is used, and it's a troubling thing to see it used frequently. But we have priorities, and when you assess how much legislation you can get through the House and how much important legislation and where it ranks and what the priorities are, sometimes you have to make tough decisions. This is a decision which I acknowledge disappoints my friend from the New Democrats. I understand that, and I will be held accountable for it, and that's as it should be.
Okay,
but this notion that there's a clear consensus because they agreed to parameters and they agreed to a referendum sometime before, during, or after the next Parliament. The idea that there's a consensus here because they agreed to very vague parameters is part of what made this issue more complex.
What about people who said that you're the government, you were given that mandate, and you could have moved forward on it?
And we gave an honest effort for the 18 months we worked on it. We have had to make a decision. We've explained why that decision was made. We've explained why that decision was made, and we expect those that feel passionate about this to feel their passion and to exercise their democratic rights.
They voted for the Liberals for that
But we ask Canadians to take a look at the priorities of their lives and ask whether or not we're addressing those on housing.
There was a majority report.
I want to get to
there was a consensus.
Okay, I want to get
say that it was because of that reason is disingenuous, and I think it's disrespectful of many of the voters who voted in because of that.
I understand.
And you know what? At the end of the day, well, there was a clear consensus. It was called a majority report, and now this is again they're using the new administration as a tool to basically get them off the hook. Again, at the end of the day, they have majority in Parliament. They would have had support from the other parties to be able to go ahead.
Totally.
If there had been a clear referendum, we would have been fine with it.
Okay, now let's out of the respect for the other priorities which you've all mentioned, just a last question. It's changing the topic. Obviously, a lot of this week was also taken up with very serious issues about the new inhabitant of the White House, Donald Trump, down south. Adam Vaughan, your government's biggest priority, if you have to look at it and tell Canadians in a nutshell what your biggest priority is faced with the multiple changes we're seeing every day from Donald Trump's White House, what's your biggest priority? Well,
our priority is very simple. We need a strong economy to grow the middle class and to help people join that middle class. And with our trade relation being so intricately engaged with the Americans, we have to do a couple of things. We have to, one, ensure that we sustain open and frank and consistent dialogue, whether it's on case-by-case issues that emerged over the weekend or whether it's on the larger and more intensified negotiations that seem to lie ahead around trade. We have to make sure we have a constant and a principled conversation with our American counterparts and in particular the White House. Secondly, we have to also make sure that as we build that economy, we stand up for Canadian industry, Canadian jobs, and do what's right to make sure that Canadians keep working and that the prosperity that we want to share more broadly across this country arrives in communities, whether they need a new factory, new housing, or they need new trade arrangements with the United States to make sure that their businesses get across the border and services come back from the United States in a way. So we have a responsibility to respond, but also to anticipate some of the challenges. But fundamental to that is good, strong diplomacy matched by good, strong advocacy on behalf of Canadians to make sure our country's interests are protected.
Okay, Dan Albas, your party has been asking a lot of questions all week long in terms of the new Trump administration. If you had to choose, coming from the Okanagan, BC, yourself, your responsibilities, what do you consider some of the biggest concerns for you?
Well, obviously all the things Adam said, any government has to protect. We have to make sure we have market access. We have to make sure that we're securing, North America along with the Americans. But they have no plan. And this is the problem, is that while we are seeing jobs coming into the United States, we are seeing 600 jobs from General Motors moving from Ontario down to Mexico, and it's because nothing Mr. Trump has done. It's because we are making this government is making our
product line is
less
moving,
competitive,
and a new product line is coming back.
And they have no plan, and they have shown no plan other than to say we have good intentions. Just trust us. And you know what? That needs to change. This government needs to produce concrete actions that they will do. They've been talking about softwood lumber. That hits my particular area the most. All the large private employers in my area are related to wood.
It's a shame you didn't conclude those negotiations before you left office.
Okay. Well, can I jump in?
Yeah.
Martin?
Okay. Because we're running out of time.
I just want to agree. I want to agree with what Adam has said. I mean, yes, those things are really, really important. Everything he said is true. But in terms of renegotiating of NAFTA, which is coming up soon, I want to know what we're going to give up. What is our plan? I think Canadians have a right to know what we're giving up if there's going to be change. I think it has to be modernized, but I'm very worried that there's nothing, it seems, on the horizon. Secondly, we expect our Prime Minister on these executive orders on immigrants and so forth to stand up for Canadian values, not just with tweets, but with action, and that's what we're looking for now.
Come on. I mean, look, there was a tweet, but there is a consistent action across all of the ministries.
There are real people being affected by this right now, and what are we doing for them?
Absolutely.
What are we doing for them?
And what we're doing is ensuring that Nexus cards, ensuring that people with dual citizenship, ensuring that people that are in
Do you have written confirmation
camps.
of anything? I think you're doing the right thing by talking.
So we found out
but what do you got to show for it?
On that note, something tells me we're going to run out. We are out of time, but something tells me we will be revisiting this issue, which is going to be a big issue for this whole session. All three of you, thanks very much for taking the time.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you.